We often talk about the burning in the bosom, the rushing wind of the Spirit, the tears of a newly discovered testimony, and the undeniable fire that accompanies a soul freshly awakened to the restored gospel. But we completely miss what happens to a testimony after 30, 40, or 50 years of relentless endurance. We celebrate the pioneer who drops their nets, abandons their old life, and crosses the frozen plains of their own personal conversion. But we rarely speak of the quiet, seasoned settler who has been building Zion for decades, whose faith no longer looks like a roaring bonfire, but instead resembles deep, glowing, unquenchable coals. There is a profound phenomenon that happens in the lives of Latter-day Saints as they enter their later decades, their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. It is a season where the faith often gets very, very quiet. If you are in this season of life, you know exactly what this feels like. You sit in sacrament meeting, listening to a newly returned missionary weep as they bear testimony, or you watch the youth experience the soaring, emotional highs of a summer pioneer trek or a youth conference. You remember feeling those exact same thrilling, spine-tingling surges of the Spirit. You remember when every scripture seemed to leap off the page with blinding light, when every prayer felt like a direct, immediate conversation with the heavens, and when the absolute certainty of the gospel pulsed through your veins with an undeniable emotional electricity. But now, years later, you sit in the pew, and the feelings are different. The dramatic spiritual fireworks have faded. The answers to prayers don't seem to arrive in rushing winds or undeniable emotional peaks. Instead, there is simply a quietness, a stillness, and for many deeply devoted saints, this quietness triggers a quiet panic. They ask themselves in the dark hours of the night, have I lost the Spirit? Have I become past feeling? Is my faith dying? Why don't I feel the burning in the bosom the way I used to when I was 25? If you have ever felt this specific silent grief, you need to know something of absolute eternal importance. You are not failing. You are not losing the Spirit. You are not sliding backward into apostasy or apathy. You are simply transitioning. You are stepping into the deep waters of spiritual maturation. And you are not the first to walk this path. When we look closely at the life, the history, and the later teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, a completely different picture emerges of what a mature, enduring testimony is supposed to look like. Joseph himself went through this exact same evolution, and he left behind a trail of breadcrumbs for us to follow when the noise of our youthful faith gives way to the profound silence of enduring trust. There is a beautiful, deeply comforting reality woven into the later years of Joseph Smith's ministry in Nauvoo. He began to teach a framework for what we might call quiet faith. He laid out 5 distinct realities about how the Holy Ghost interacts with a seasoned soul, and how a mature saint is meant to stand firm when the heavens seem to lower their volume. The first profound reality Joseph taught about this transition is the shift from profound emotional experiences to the reception of pure intelligence. In the early days of the Church, particularly in Kirtland, the manifestations of the Spirit were incredibly outward, highly emotional, and physically overwhelming. People saw visions, spoke in tongues, prophesied, and experienced ecstatic spiritual outpourings. The Spirit was undeniably visceral. But as Joseph matured, and as he began to teach the saints how to build a lasting Zion, his description of the Holy Ghost changed. In a sermon given in Nauvoo in 1839, Joseph taught that the Spirit does not always operate through grand emotional swelling. Instead, he spoke of a quieter, more penetrating reality. He said, "A person may profit by noticing the first intimation of the spirit of revelation. For instance, when you feel pure intelligence flowing into you, it may give you sudden strokes of ideas. Listen to the precision of his words. He did not say pure emotion. He did not say pure excitement. He said pure intelligence. As we age in the gospel, the Lord begins to respect our maturity by communicating with us less through our adrenaline and more through our mind, our settled understanding, and our quiet intuition. Think about how you relate to a child compared to how you relate to a trusted adult friend. With a toddler, you use grand gestures, loud praise, heightened emotion, and dramatic facial expressions to communicate love and boundaries. But with a spouse or a lifelong friend, you can sit across from them in a quiet room, exchange a single glance, and understand perfectly what the other is thinking. The love is not less. The communication is simply more refined, deeper, and requires less external noise. This is exactly what the Lord does with a seasoned Latter-day Saint. The sudden strokes of ideas, the quiet realization of how to handle a family crisis, the gentle, almost imperceptible nudge to call a neighbor, the settled peace you feel when reading a familiar verse in the Book of Mormon. These are not signs of a diminished spirit. They are the manifestations of pure intelligence. The Lord trusts you enough now to drop the dramatic fireworks and speak to you in the still, small voice of pure, unadulterated truth. When you no longer feel the sweeping emotional highs, do not mourn the loss of the toddler-level communication. Rejoice that the Lord now considers you a spiritual adult, capable of holding pure intelligence in a quiet, settled mind. This understanding naturally flows into the second profound reality Joseph uncovered, which was born out of his darkest hour: the principle of divine silence as a tool for spiritual maturation. We often talk about Liberty Jail as a crucible of suffering, but we completely miss the psychological and spiritual shift that occurred within Joseph's own testimony during those bitter winter months of 1838 and 1839. Up until Liberty Jail, Joseph was accustomed to a God who moved swiftly. Angels appeared, revelations were dictated rapidly, enemies were called out by name in the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Lord seemed to be standing right over Joseph's shoulder, micromanaging the restoration. But in Liberty Jail, as the saints were being raped, murdered, and driven freezing from the state of Missouri, Joseph cried out in sheer agony. You know the words from Doctrine and Covenants section 121. O God, where art thou? And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place? Joseph was experiencing the ultimate terrifying quietness of faith. The heavens seemed sealed. The emotional comfort of the spirit was gone, replaced by cold stone, terrible food, and the agonizing silence of God. But what happened next is the blueprint for every older saint going through a dry season of faith. The Lord did not immediately rescue him. He did not send an army of angels to break the prison doors. Instead, the Lord spoke in a profound, quiet tone of eternal perspective. My son, peace be unto thy soul. Thine adversity and thine afflictions shall be but a small moment. And then, the Lord taught Joseph something that redefines how we view our spiritual endurance. He told Joseph that his days were known, and his years would not be numbered less. Therefore, fear not what man can do, for God shall be with you forever and ever. The lesson of Liberty Jail is that there comes a time in every faithful saint's life when God steps back, lowers the volume of his immediate comfort, and requires us to stand on what we already know. When your faith gets quiet, it is often because you have entered your own spiritual Liberty Jail, not necessarily a place of sin or punishment, but a place of profound proving. God is asking, will you trust me in the dark as much as you praised me in the light? Will you hold onto the covenants we made when the sun was shining, now that the winter has set in? Joseph emerged from Liberty Jail a fundamentally changed man. He was no longer the exuberant, youthful visionary. He was a deeply grounded, solemn, unshakable prophet. His faith had moved from his emotions deep into his bones. When you sit in the congregation and feel that your faith is quiet, realize that this is the Liberty Jail maturation. You are no longer required to feel a constant, emotional thrill to prove your devotion. Your devotion is proved by the fact that you simply keep showing up, keep taking the sacrament, keep loving your family, and keep standing your ground even when the heavens are quiet. That is not a weak testimony. That is the strongest, most terrifyingly beautiful testimony a human being can offer to God. It is the faith that endures well. But to fully grasp how this maturation looks in practice, we must look at the third element of this quiet faith, which is the monumental shift from the Kirtland era of the Church to the Nauvoo era of the Church. If you study the history of the early saints, you will see a fascinating theological and spiritual progression that mirrors the life of an aging member of the Church today. Kirtland was the era of building and outpourings. The dedication of the Kirtland Temple was perhaps the most Pentecostal, dramatically miraculous event in modern history. Hundreds of people reported seeing angels on the roof. They spoke in tongues. They saw pillars of fire. The spiritual gifts were poured out in a torrential flood. Kirtland represents the youthful era of faith. It is the mission field. It is the newly baptized convert. It is the raw, unpolished, explosive joy of discovering the restored gospel. But Joseph did not stay in Kirtland, and the Lord did not intend for the church to remain in that state of perpetual ecstatic emotion. They moved to Nauvoo, and in Nauvoo, the tone of the restoration changed completely. The miracles and the rushing winds gave way to deep, solemn, quiet ordinances. In Nauvoo, Joseph didn't focus on speaking in tongues. He focused on the endowment, eternal marriage, baptisms for the dead, and the sealing power. Think about the difference between the Kirtland temple dedication and the Nauvoo temple endowment. The Kirtland experience was loud, public, and emotionally overwhelming. The Nauvoo experience, which began in the quiet, dusty upper room of Joseph's red brick store, was silent, orderly, highly symbolic, and deeply personal. It was about covenants, not crowds. It was about binding families across eternity, not shouting hosannas on the rooftops. Many members of the church who are 50, 60, or 70 years old feel a sense of loss because they are trying to recreate their personal Kirtland era. They are chasing the spiritual adrenaline of their youth, wondering why they can't feel the rush of the rushing mighty wind anymore. It is because the Lord is trying to lead you into your personal Nauvoo era. He wants to move you from the outward, emotional gifts of the Spirit to the deep, eternal, covenant-binding fruits of the Spirit. In your 20s and 30s, your faith was about action. Serving missions, having children, building careers, running youth programs, and organizing massive ward activities. It was loud, chaotic, and beautiful. But in your later years, your faith is meant to mirror the Nauvoo endowment. It becomes contemplative. It becomes about the quiet, unyielding commitment to the veil, to your ancestors, to the sealing power, and to the deep, silent mysteries of godliness. When your faith gets quiet, it is not fading. It is simply entering the temple. It is leaving the noisy streets of the world and stepping into the celestial room of your own soul, where God does not need to shout to be understood. Embrace the Nauvoo era of your testimony. It is richer, deeper, and far more eternal than the emotional highs of your Kirtland days. This deepening naturally requires us to develop a new set of spiritual muscles, which leads us to the fourth profound teaching of Joseph Smith regarding mature faith: the capacity to prove contraries and accept the complexities of mortality. In 1842, as Joseph was dealing with intense persecution, betrayals from some of his closest friends, and the overwhelming burden of leading a complex people, he wrote a letter in which he penned one of his most profound philosophical statements. He said, "By proving contraries, truth is made manifest. When you are young in the gospel, your faith is often very black and white. You believe that if you follow all the rules, pay your tithing, and read your scriptures, God will protect you from tragedy. Your children will all stay active in the church, and life will follow a predictable, blessed path." The youthful testimony does not know what to do with paradox. It demands simple answers. But if you live long enough, the black and white shatters into a million shades of gray. You watch faithful people suffer horrific diseases. You see children raised in the covenant step away from the church. You dive into the complexities of church history and realize that early leaders, including Joseph himself, were flawed, multifaceted human beings who made mistakes. You see changes in church policies and procedures that confuse you. The neat, tidy boxes of your early faith are blown apart by the relentless reality of a fallen world. For some, this complexity destroys their faith entirely because they demand that the church and the gospel remain in their pristine, uncomplicated, black and white state. But for the mature saint, the saint who is developing this quiet, enduring faith, they learn to practice Joseph's doctrine of proving contraries. Proving contraries means having the spiritual capacity to hold two seemingly opposing truths in your heart at the same time without losing your mind or your testimony. It is the ability to say, "I know that God heals the sick, and I know that my righteous spouse was not healed, and both of these realities can exist in my heart without destroying my trust in God." It is the ability to say, "I know that prophets are called of God to lead this church, and I know that they are fallible men who learn line upon line, and my testimony does not break under that tension." Quiet faith is not a blind, ignorant faith. In fact, it is the exact opposite. Quiet faith has seen it all. It has seen the hypocrisy, the tragedy, the historical messiness, and the unanswered prayers, and it has chosen to stay anyway. It has synthesized the pain of life with the promises of eternity. When the fiery zeal of youth fades, it is replaced by a massive, expansive heart that can hold the tragedies of mortality without blaming God. If your testimony feels less exuberant than it used to be, it might simply be because it is carrying much heavier weight. You are bearing the burdens of a life fully lived. You are watching your loved ones struggle, you are feeling the ache of an aging body, and you are navigating a world that seems to be spiraling into chaos. The fact that you are still sitting in the pew, still opening your scriptures, still bowing your head in prayer despite the immense weight of the contraries you are proving every single day, that is a miracle. It is a quiet, unspectacular, earth-shattering miracle. The Lord does not look at your tired, weary, complex faith and wish you were as bubbly as a teenager. He looks at you with profound reverence, because you have learned how to hold the bitter and the sweet in the exact same cup, and still choose to drink it. Ultimately, all of these transitions, the shift to pure intelligence, the endurance of Liberty Jail silence, the maturation into Nauvoo covenant theology, and the proving of contraries, lead us to the fifth and most profound reality of an aging Latter-day Saints faith. It is what Joseph Smith passionately taught in his final years, the transition from being a wandering pioneer to becoming a Zion pillar, anchored by what the scriptures call the more sure word of prophecy. In 1843, preaching from the second epistle of Peter, Joseph spoke extensively about making our calling and election sure. He taught that there comes a point in a saint's life after they have been proven in all things, after they have endured the tests of mortality without flinching, when the Lord seals upon them an unshakable assurance. Joseph taught that we must move beyond the basic principles and go on to perfection, establishing a connection with the heavens that cannot be broken by the trials of life. Listen to how Joseph described the mind of a mature, seasoned saint who has reached this level of quiet, enduring faith. He said, "The mind or the intelligence which man possesses is co-equal with God himself. I am dwelling on the immutability of the spirit of man." He spoke of a faith that becomes an anchor to the soul, sure and steadfast. When you are young, your faith is like a sail. It catches the wind of the Spirit, and it propels you forward with incredible speed and excitement. But sails are vulnerable. They can be ripped by sudden storms. They are at the mercy of the changing weather. If the wind stops blowing, the ship stops moving. But as you age, the Lord asks you to pull down the sail and drop the anchor. An anchor does not move. An anchor does not catch the wind. An anchor does not experience the thrill of cutting through the waves. An anchor sinks deep into the dark, unseen depths of the ocean floor, lodges itself into the bedrock, and holds the entire ship steady when the hurricane hits. Your quiet faith is the anchor. You no longer need the rushing wind of emotional spiritual highs to know that the church is true, because you are lodged in the bedrock of a lifetime of quiet obedience. You have become a pillar in the temple of your God. Think about the older men and women in your ward. They may not be the ones giving the most energetic, tear-filled talks. They may not be the ones organizing the massive, flashy ward events. They often sit quietly in the back rows. But they are the ones who show up to help a grieving widow. They are the ones who quietly pay their tithing year after year, decade after decade, without fanfare. They are the ones who fold the chairs, clean the building, work in the quiet halls of the temple, and offer the steady, trembling prayers that hold the very fabric of the ward together. They do not have a flashy faith. They have an immovable faith. Joseph Smith, in his final days in Carthage jail, did not have a booming, dramatic spiritual experience. As the mob gathered outside, the prophet did not call down fire from heaven. He didn't pace the floor preaching loud sermons. According to the accounts of those who were with him, the atmosphere in that jail cell was solemn, quiet, and deeply peaceful. John Taylor sang a hymn. Joseph asked him to sing it again. Joseph read from the Book of Mormon. He looked out the window. He was a man who knew his fate, who had made peace with his God, and who possessed a faith so deep, so quiet, and so settled that even the prospect of a brutal assassination could not shake his composure. He had transitioned completely, from the ecstatic, visionary farm boy of New York to the quiet, majestic, unshakable martyr of Carthage. He died with a quiet faith. So, to you, the saints who have labored in the vineyard through the heat of the day, to those of you who have raised your children, buried your loved ones, fought your demons, and stayed true to your covenants even when the heavens felt like brass. To those of you who worry that because your heart no longer burns like a furnace, your testimony is somehow deficient, hear the words of the prophet Joseph. Hear the deep, comforting assurance of the restored gospel. Your quietness is not a void. It is a sanctuary. Your lack of constant spiritual adrenaline is not a loss. It is a graduation. The Lord has removed the scaffolding of emotional dependency so that the magnificent, permanent structure of your divine nature can stand on its own. You are no longer being fed milk. You are digesting the meat of the gospel. You are receiving pure intelligence. You are proving contraries. You are passing the test of Liberty Jail. You are officiating in the quiet majesty of your personal Nauvoo. You are dropping the anchor. Do not be afraid of the silence in your soul. Listen to it. Rest in it. The Lord is no longer shouting to get your attention because he knows you are finally still enough to hear him whisper. The rushing wind has passed. The earthquake has settled. The fire has burned down to a radiant, unquenchable glow. And what remains is the still, small voice. Take a deep breath. Look back at the decades of your devotion. You have not lost the spirit. You have simply become one with it. You have endured. And in the economy of heaven, endurance is the ultimate expression of faith. I want to hear from the seasoned saints today. In the comments below, I want you to share how your testimony has changed from your 20s to where you are right now. What does your quiet faith look like today compared to when you were younger? Share your experience, because there is a younger saint reading these comments who desperately needs to know that the quietness they are starting to feel is normal. And if this message brought peace to your soul, please subscribe to the channel. Share this with a friend who might be struggling with their own spiritual silence, and let us continue to build our foundation on the deep, enduring doctrines of the restoration.